Hey guys, I know there's a lot of videos on the internet about the importance of sleep and what sleep does for us, and even some videos about how to improve your sleep. But I want to go over 11 very specific things that drastically improved my sleep. Now I'm willing to bet that a lot of the things on my list are things that you haven't heard about. Number one is using a nasal dilator. Now you might be surprised why I started with this one, but I learned a lot about the importance of breathing and proper airflow when you're sleeping. And I also learned about when you don't have correct airflow, what this can do to your body. For example, simply having some type of obstruction, like if you're snoring and you're breathing, it can lead to a lot of oxidative stress in your body. You get oxidative stress when you have this imbalance of your reactive oxygen species, or these free radicals, and these antioxidants in your body. When you have these extra free radicals, it can damage a lot of different parts in your body and contribute to a lot of different diseases. So this study was looking at 3 different groups and their oxidative stress. So the first group was a very severe sleep apnea group. So they had AHI score of over 30. Now your AHI score, your apnea-hypopnea index, is a measure of the severity of your sleep apnea. It's basically a measure of how many times in an hour you stop breathing or have very restricted breathing. So having a score under 5 is normal, means you have no sleep apnea. 5 to 15 means you have mild sleep apnea. 15 to 30 is moderate or medium sleep apnea. Over 30 is severe sleep apnea. The second group had mild sleep apnea, so it was 10 people with their AHI score less than 15. Now the third group was 10 people with no sleep apnea, but they had a nasal impairment where they couldn't properly breathe through their nose. All 3 groups had the same amount of oxidative stress. And we have multiple studies that show that people with sleep apnea have way higher levels of oxidative stress than a normal healthy person. But here in this study, we see that even people that don't have sleep apnea but simply have trouble breathing through their nose have just as much oxidative stress. So what the study is really showing is it's not just having sleep apnea. Any obstruction, even an obstruction in your nose with your breathing, even if it doesn't cause sleep apnea, will still contribute to the same amount of oxidative stress in your body. Now, part of the reason that this could be happening is anytime you have this resistance in your breathing, your airflow gets more turbulent. In other words, there's times where it's really easy to breathe and times where it's really hard to breathe, and you have to fight really hard to breathe. It's not really consistent, normal breathing. This can lead to a lot of physical stress on your body, which in turn will lead to more free radicals, which can contribute to that oxidative stress like we talked about. Now, how does this get to improving my sleep and using this nasal dilator like I talked about? Well, any improvement in your airflow will help improve your sleep. Your oxygen will be distributed throughout your body, including your brain better. In turn, you're gonna feel more well rested. You're also gonna be less likely to wake up throughout the night multiple times, even if you don't realize it, and you're gonna be more likely to get that deep sleep that so many people are lacking. I can tell you firsthand that if it works for you, you will feel the difference. Now, not everybody needs to use a nasal dilator, so how did I determine that I would benefit from one? Well, sometimes people get this collapse in their nose. So if you look in the mirror and take a pretty strong inhale through your nose, like, you can check and see if your nose kind of collapses. It can collapse in a couple different spots. So sometimes it'll collapse a little higher up right here, or it can collapse more externally right on the outer rim of your nose, called the ala of your nose. If this happens to you, using that nasal dilator can be a really simple way to prevent that collapse when you're sleeping and improve that airflow. Now, there's a couple different ones that I would recommend. You can see which one works best for you. There's nothing fancy that I use. I use something called Breathe Right strips. You can get them on Amazon. It's just a piece of tape basically that goes over your nose, and it kind of opens up your nose a little bit. You can also get an internal nasal dilator. The one that I like is called Mute. It's basically this clip that goes on the inside of your nose, and the cool thing about those is you can actually crank it open more on one side. So sometimes that nasal collapse that I was talking about, it happens more on one side versus the other. So then you can crank it open more on that one side. Now, I'm not affiliated with either of these products, but I do think that they're really cool, and I think you should try both and see which one will work better for you. Now, the other cool thing about this nasal dilator is in some people it can fix or even lower the severity of their sleep apnea. So this was a randomized control trial, and it took people that already had moderate sleep apnea, and it put them into 2 different groups, and they were tracking their sleep. So one group was using this nasal decongestant spray and using this nasal dilator strip, and the other group was a placebo. So they were spraying something up their nose that didn't do anything, and the nasal dilator strip also didn't do anything. The group that used a nasal dilator, their sleep apnea level went down 12 times per hour. So that means it moved these patients from moderate sleep apnea to mild sleep apnea, or it completely eliminated their sleep apnea altogether. Not only that, they also slept better, they had better sleep efficiency, and they had less interruptions in their sleep. Now, I know I talked a lot about this one topic alone, but the last thing I want to mention is if you have that nasal collapse, sometimes using a nasal dilator alone is not enough. And sometimes you need to get a surgery done to correct this. So if you tried using both of these different types of nasal dilators and you still cannot properly breathe through your nose, or your nose is still collapsing, you should try going to an ear, nose, and throat, an ENT doctor, and see if they can help. Now, number two, the second thing I want to mention is mouth tape. We already talked about improving your airflow through your nose, so you might as well keep breathing through your nose. The thing is that breathing through your nose is so much better than breathing through your mouth. Now, I talked a lot about this in different videos, so I'm not going to go into detail, but basically you get a lot more filtering with your nose. You filter out a lot of viruses and bacteria. You filter out a lot of dust and particles. You also humidify the air. You temper the air to make it better temperature and better for your lungs, so you cause less inflammation when the air enters your lungs. You also produce a molecule called nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator and an antibacterial, so it'll help prevent you from getting sick around your tonsil and nasopharynx area and prevent those tonsil and adenoid infections. And that alone will help improve your airflow because your tonsils won't be as big. But also the vasodilator aspect of it will improve the gas exchange in your lungs. You also get better CO2 or carbon dioxide regulation when you breathe in and out through your nose. Like I said, I'm not going to go into detail about this, but the main thing you need to know is all of this will improve the oxygen delivery you get to your cells, and that includes the cells in your brain. That means you'll be way less likely to wake up with that brain fog and have that chronic fatigue, and you'll be more well rested when you wake up. And also, when you breathe through your mouth at night, that alone can cause you to have sleep apnea. The reason for that is when you're sleeping on your back and your mouth opens and your tongue goes to the back of your mouth, that alone can cause snoring, which is already a sign of restricted airflow. But also that tongue can go all the way back to the back of your throat and completely cut off your breathing. This is sleep apnea. And then after some time, you'll wake up and then start breathing again. And this can happen repeatedly throughout the night. This study took 20 people with mild sleep apnea. It had them take an at-home sleep test, and then 1 week later, they redid that sleep test, but they had their mouths taped shut. 13 of the 20 people had a significant response to that mouth tape. Their AHI score went from 8.3 to 4.7, bringing them out of that mild sleep apnea range. Also, their snoring went down by 47%, and they also had improvements with their oxygen delivery as well. The thing with using mouth tape is you gotta be able to breathe through your nose in the first place. If you know for sure you're not gonna be able to get through a night with breathing through your nose, what you wanna do is first do a nose unblocking exercise before you put this mouth tape on. Now, I went into detail on how to properly unblock your nose in a different video, so I'm gonna put that link in the description below. But the second thing you wanna do is put that piece of tape vertically. So the tape I use is something called 3M micropore paper tape, which is basically a medical grade tape that you can just rip off and tape over your mouth. And I personally put this tape horizontally over my lips. The reason for that is because I have a mustache and a beard, and if I put it vertically, then it will rip out those hairs. But if you don't have that, then put that piece of tape vertically so that you can still breathe through your mouth if you have to. Now, I also wanted to talk about this nose unblocking exercise. So again, I talked about this in other videos, but essentially what you do is a normal inhale and exhale. And after the exhale, you hold your breath, and then you bob your head back and forth as much as you can until you have a medium urge to breathe again. So it's gonna look like this. Also, instead of bobbing your head while holding your breath, you can also jog in place or go for a walk. Then when you have that medium urge to breathe, you can recover by breathing in and out through your nose for 1 minute, and then repeat this exercise 6 times. The key here is when you're holding your breath, you don't want to be dying to take your next breath when you're recovering. After you do this about 6 times in a row, then your nose should really open up. Now, these first 2 tips using that nasal dilator and that mouth tape are very simple to try, and you can very easily see if it's improving your sleep. If you're waking up feeling much better and much more well rested, then great, it's working better for you. But if you don't like it or it's not working for you, you don't have to try it. And I still have 9 more things that I want to talk about. Number 3 is lowering the temperature. This is one of those things that I was genuinely surprised how much of a difference it made. Not just in my sleep quality, but also how fast I was able to fall asleep in the first place. The reason that lowering your temperature is important is because your core body temperature needs to drop about 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree Celsius in order to initiate sleep. If we lower our thermostat temperature, this can help us get there. The thing is, our sleeping patterns emerged from eastern parts of Africa. And over there, before we were sleeping indoors with these thermostats, the temperatures would fluctuate a lot, like 12 to 14 degrees throughout the day. And obviously it would be colder at nighttime. But now with these thermostats, we can control the temperature and keep it one stable temperature all day long. The problem with that is our brains don't get that cooling sensation at nighttime that we were evolved to get. And in turn, we don't get as much of that melatonin release. Our melatonin is a very powerful sleep hormone that will help us initiate sleep. So we want to make sure we maximize this when it's time to go to sleep. In this study, scientists gave these participants these sleeping suits where they could control their temperature. When scientists actually cooled these participants' body temperature, in people that were already healthy, they showed a 20% improvement in their ability to fall asleep. And in elderly people, they showed an 18% improvement, and people with insomnia, they showed a whole 25% improvement. Also, before the study, the people had about a 58% probability of waking up in the middle of the night and having trouble going back to sleep. Once they were able to cool the body temperature, that went down to just 4%. Now, the ideal temperature for most people is going to be 65 degrees Fahrenheit or about 18 degrees Celsius. I know that seems cold, but you can still cover yourself with a blanket or something like that. But you need that thermostat to be cold to get these benefits. Now, number 4 is taking a hot shower before you go to sleep. Now, this kind of ties into the earlier thing where cooling down your body will help get that melatonin release and help you stay asleep throughout the night and also help you initiate sleep. So this is something that I started doing. And the reason that this works is when you take that hot shower, your blood vessels will dilate, and then after you get out, that will kind of let that heat escape from your body. So it basically starts that cooling signal for your body to try to go to sleep. Now, you don't have to take a hot shower. You can also take a hot bath or go to the sauna, whatever works best for you. Now, here's a study that was looking specifically at taking hot baths. We took these healthy adults, and when they had them take these hot baths before they went to sleep, it led to a 10 to 15% increase in their deep NREM sleep when sleeping. Now, just so you know, I talked about this in other videos too, but your deep NREM sleep is part of your sleep cycles. Your sleep cycles basically change from your NREM to your REM sleep. And both your NREM and your REM sleep are really important, but your deep NREM sleep and your REM sleep are 2 areas where people really lack getting. Now, I know a lot of people talk about cold showers and benefits with that as well, and I am actually a fan of taking cold showers in some situations too, and I put a link in the description below where I talked about cold showers too. Now, the 5th thing that really improved my sleep is trying to time my sleep with my circadian rhythm. Now, this is one of the hardest things because we aren't robots. Our circadian rhythm is basically this 24-hour cycle that goes on in our body, and it's controlled by the SCN, or the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a structure in our brain. But essentially what the key here is going to sleep and waking up at the same time every single day for the rest of your life. Now, that is pretty much impossible, but I'm hoping we can take some of the concepts away from here and use it to still improve our sleep. But the reason this is important is because it will maximize your NREM and your REM sleep. And I know we talked about that before, about the importance of both of these different stages in your sleep cycle. But your NREM and your REM sleep are not distributed evenly throughout the night. Basically, your NREM sleep will dominate in the early half of the night, and your REM sleep will dominate in the later part of the night. Your NREM sleep is more important for pruning off neural connections and basically taking out any unnecessary information. And your REM sleep will take that information and kind of turn it into a meaning as a whole and kind of get more general knowledge from it. The problem is when we go to sleep later and we wake up earlier, we end up eating into this REM or non-REM sleep. So for example, I try to go to sleep between 10:30 and 11 p.m. and I try to wake up between 6:30 and 7 a.m. But let's say one day I'm trying to go to sleep super late. Instead of trying to sleep at 11 p.m., I'll sleep instead at 1 a.m. And miraculously, I'll sleep 8 hours. I'll sleep from 1 a.m. to 9 p.m. The problem is we're still going to be eating into that non-REM sleep because our circadian rhythm was programmed to go to sleep at 11 p.m. and that's when our non-REM sleep was starting. But if we go to sleep 2 hours too late, then even if we sleep the 8 hours, we're still going to be missing a lot of that non-REM sleep. And it's the same thing if we wake up 2 hours early. If I normally wake up at 7 a.m., but instead I try to wake up at 5 a.m., I'm not just missing 25% of my sleep. I'm really missing 60 to 90% of my REM sleep specifically. Now I try to focus on timing my sleeping patterns with my circadian rhythm, but obviously life catches up to me just like anybody else, and it's really hard to do this every single day. I mean, how many of us have to go to work on the weekdays, and then when the weekend comes, we try to just stay up late so we can hang out and enjoy our time off? Well, I try to manage this in two different ways. The first is I try to focus on getting 8 hours of sleep on the weekdays first. When I do this, I do not have to sleep in as much on the weekend, because a lot of people will try to sleep 6 hours on the weekdays and then catch up on all that lack of sleep on the weekend. That's not going to be good for our circadian rhythm. Also, if I am going to sleep later or try to sleep in, I only do about an hour. So for example, if I normally try to sleep between 10:30 and 11, I'll only try to push it to 11:30 and midnight. I know that seems super lame, but for me, I already am getting tired at 10:30, 11 p.m. and I don't want to stay up super late anyway. But if people want to hang out or something, I try to push it an hour and not more than that. What I find is when I push it way past that, and instead if I go to sleep at like 2 a.m., even if I sleep 8 hours, I'm not going to feel the same the next day. I'm going to feel like crap. The reason I only try to do an hour is, again, back to that SCN, that suprachiasmatic nucleus in our brain. That SCN can only shift about an hour a day in our circadian rhythm. So this is why people feel jet lagged. Like when they go to a time zone that's 8 hours different than their current time zone, it'll typically take them about 8 days to really adjust to that time zone, because every day you're going to shift an hour closer to that new time zone. Unfortunately, you can't just do all 8 hours in one day. Maybe in the future we'll have some pill we can take where we can magically adjust our circadian rhythm. Now that being said, there are going to be some days where you do push it way past that and you end up staying up till like 4 a.m. or something like that. You still need to live your life. I'm talking about like normal days where you don't really have anything going on, but you want to stay up a little later. I only really try to push it an hour. Now, number 6 is using a dark bedroom. Now, again, we're going to go back to our circadian rhythm and our melatonin production and all of that. Just like we need it cool to help our circadian rhythm and to help us get our body ready to go to sleep, we also need darkness. And darkness is very important for that melatonin molecule. We're in a society now where we have so much light, where our bodies don't really know what it's like to be in darkness. But if we go back to our ancestors and how our sleeping patterns evolved, our main source of light was sunlight. And once that went away, you couldn't really see anything. Maybe you had a fire light in front of you, but that really didn't show you that much. You didn't have street lamps and other things lighting up the whole city where you could still artificially keep yourself awake. And you'll be surprised how little light it takes to really suppress your melatonin production. So I would suggest a good idea would be anything that distracts you from getting good sleep should be out of the bedroom. Now, I know, again, this is gonna get impractical, and a lot of these tips online are completely not practical. Like, how can I not have my phone in my room when that's my alarm clock to go to work? But at least minimizing the light. So if you have blinds, close those blinds. Try to keep it as dark as possible. Any artificial light that's coming, like for example from your clock, turn that clock down. Or if your computer has this bright light, try to cover it with something, or try to put a piece of tape over the different lights in your room and keep it as dark as possible. You can also try using an eye mask to keep it pitch black. But these are all ways that really helped improve my sleep and again, keep me asleep throughout the night. Some people think I'm crazy. Like when I go to a hotel or something, I'll do the same thing. I'll make sure that turn that clock down so I don't see the light from that. I'll make sure the blinds are closed, and sometimes I'll just have to bring my own eye mask with me when I'm traveling so that I get that darkness. Now this leads us to number 7, which is getting sunlight exposure during the day. Just like it's important to get darkness at nighttime, it's also important to get that sunlight exposure during the day. And again, this comes down to our melatonin. Our melatonin will start to shoot up in response to darkness. And this is why towards the evening time we start to feel sleepy, because it gets dark outside. It's not the only thing that controls our melatonin, but it's one of the main things. Now, our sunlight will suppress our melatonin. So it's important and a good idea to wake up with sunlight. So if you're someone that's lucky enough that has blinds that will be like pitch black at nighttime, but then towards the morning time, they'll automatically open to your sleeping time so that you can still wake up with the sunlight, that would be really cool and super ideal. But not many people have that option. So I'd recommend when you wake up, try to go outside and get sunlight for at least about 30 minutes a day. If that's also not an option for you, try to at least use really bright lights in the morning, like when you're getting ready for work or something like that. Number 8 is to avoid large meals at nighttime right before you're about to go to bed. Now, I'm not gonna spend too much time working about this one, but a general rule of thumb that really works for me, I'm not saying it's gonna work for everybody, but for me, is to avoid eating about 2 to 3 hours before I go into bed. Now, I'm talking about like a full meal, like light snacking, like if you're eating popcorn or something, watching a movie, that's fine. But there is some evidence that we sleep better when we aren't full, and actually sometimes even when we're slightly hungry. And if you have a full meal right before you go to sleep, it can also lead to indigestion, which is also not good for your sleep. Now, I also try to avoid drinking water about 30 minutes to an hour before I go to sleep. Now, this one is a lot harder for me, and sometimes I have to drink some water right before I go to sleep just because I get thirsty. But this will really help, and I think it's pretty obvious. It'll help prevent you from waking up and peeing in the middle of the night. And we all know how hard that is when you get up and you have to go use the restroom and then you try to come back, then you lie awake in bed sitting there wondering why you can't go to sleep. If I do drink some water right before I go to bed, I do try to at least go to the bathroom and pee right before I go to sleep. Now, number 9 is I don't nap. Now, personally, I just don't nap because my schedule doesn't allow me to nap because I'm at work all day, and then when I get home closer to the evening time. There's no really point in napping then. Now, some tips if you do nap, and I have nothing against naps, and I actually think napping is beneficial for a lot of people. But I would avoid napping later in the day after, let's say, 3 p.m., and I would also avoid napping for too long. The reason is because of this molecule called adenosine. We talked a lot about this hormone called melatonin, which helps regulate our sleep. But our adenosine is also really important for our sleep, and it's another thing that really controls our sleep. Our adenosine is different from our melatonin though, because our adenosine is only dependent on how long we've been awake. It's not really dependent on our circadian rhythm at all. So the longer you are awake, the more of this adenosine molecule you get that builds up, that creates this sleep pressure and makes us feel sleepy. But anytime you sleep, it clears away this adenosine. So you can kind of see the problem here, because if you clear away too much of this adenosine, then it's going to be harder for you to go to sleep. So I recommend trying to keep your nap under an hour, and really I like a 30-minute nap at best. You don't need to get a full 90-minute sleep cycle when you nap. And actually for me, what I found is when I sleep a full 90-minute sleep cycle and I start getting into that REM sleep, I have a really hard time waking up from that nap. But when I keep it at 30 minutes, then I wake up feeling much better and not having to stay asleep the whole time. This is something that you can try, keeping the naps earlier and also keeping them shorter, and see if that helps your sleep. I know for me, anytime I do nap, I don't nap that often. I really rarely nap, but when I have to, like if I'm sleep deprived or something like that, I will try to keep it for about 30 minutes, and I'll try to keep it earlier in the afternoon or morning time. Now, number 10 is I don't drink caffeine. Now, I know I'm talking mainly about things that I did that improved my sleep. This is just something that I find that I think really helps keep my sleep good. And this has to do again with that adenosine molecule, because when you drink caffeine, it blocks the adenosine from getting to its receptor. So even if this adenosine builds up in your brain, it's not actually doing anything because it's not actually getting to its adenosine receptor. Now, I have nothing against coffee drinkers, but I will say keep it really similar to your naps. Try to limit how much you're drinking and keep it earlier in the day. Again, try to avoid drinking it after 3 p.m. And the reason is coffee has a really long half-life. It has a half-life of about 6 hours. So that means if you drink a cup of coffee at 6 p.m. at midnight, half of that cup of coffee is still in your system. So drinking a cup of coffee at 6 p.m. is essentially drinking half a cup of coffee at midnight. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh, I can drink a cup of coffee and I can go to sleep right after and I'm perfectly fine. You might be able to go to sleep, But what the studies show is that sleep is not as deep. You don't get as good quality of sleep when you have more caffeine in your body than when you don't have that caffeine. Now, I also want to quickly add to this one, avoid alcohol and avoid nicotine, especially later in the day. I know it seemed like a buzzkill, but alcohol, we know, really fragments your sleep, meaning you will wake up multiple times throughout the sleep when you have alcohol right before you go to bed, and this obviously will lower your sleep quality, but also people who drink alcohol really lower the amount of REM sleep that they get. So that means that you can sleep a full 8 hours, but you're not gonna get that good quality of sleep. And also people tend to wake up in the middle of the night once that alcohol wears off. And with nicotine, nicotine is a stimulant. So even if people go to sleep, they often sleep very lightly, and kind of similar to caffeine, they don't get that deep sleep. And also the thing with smokers is smokers tend to wake up really early in the morning because of that nicotine withdrawal. Now, number 11, the last thing on my list that really improved my sleep is just trying to relax a little bit before you go to bed. You don't want to be up working all day straight until it's time to go to sleep. Trust me, I used to do this and I really had trouble going to sleep right after. You can't just go from working to asleep just like that. You need some time where you can kind of buffer and relax a little bit. So you want to make some time to read or listen to an audiobook or do something relaxing. Even watching a TV show. I know I talked about lights, but what some studies are showing is as long as it's not something super engaging, those lights might not be super bad. Now, ideally, you won't have any light exposure and you can do something that doesn't expose you to light as you're relaxing. But again, we're all human, we're not robots. Some people like to watch TV before they go to bed. What I will say is watching TV will be better than playing a video game right before you go to bed, because watching a TV show is much more relaxing, whereas playing a video game is going to be much more stimulating for your brain. You don't want to go to bed with an active mind and an active sympathetic nervous system where you're in this fight or flight and anxious mode, because then you're just going to be lying awake in bed with more anxiety. And then you might be lying awake wondering why you can't go to sleep and then have even more anxiety. So make sure you take that time to buffer in that relaxing before you go to bed. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked the video, and let me know if any of these tips worked for you, or if you hated one of them, or if there's even something else that you want to add that really helped your sleep. I want to talk a little about the relationship between your sleep and your mental health. I mean, we all know that we need to sleep, and sleep is good. But not many people know that simply not sleeping correctly, whether it's your sleep timing, your duration, or your sleep quality, can seriously affect your mental and emotional health. In fact, there's not a single